Not me pinning a fancy ribbon to a $10 Topshop turtleneck and looking bougie. Hey guys, it's Julia. Welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be the closer to my palette series. At the beginning of the year, I want to say like March, maybe, like at the beginning of quarantine, I decided to kind of do this little personal quest of going through my entire palette collection and doing a look on Instagram with every single palette in my collection. It is now October, so clearly it took a while. I'd originally planned to do like an eyeshadow look every single day, so I'd be done in like a month and a half. That did not happen, but I decided to call it the palette series. Wow. Super original name. It's for Instagram originally, but I kind of talked about it a couple times on my YouTube channel, and my intention was to use all my palettes a little bit more. I'd found that I was kind of reaching for the same like 5 palettes every time I went to go do a makeup look, and I thought kind of putting a quest down on paper, or at least in my mind, and forcing myself to go through and use every single palette in my collection until I could go back and use another one was really helpful to me, as well as to kind of like showcase the different makeup looks that you can get out of different palettes and get to know my collection a little bit better. So those were another goal that I had when starting the palette series, was to kind of get over this hump that I've encountered when decluttering, which is I'll look at a palette and be like, oh, you know what? I can't declutter this right now because I want to do this specific look that I have in mind someday. I figured doing the palette series, I could go through each of those palettes and do those looks that I planned out, execute that look that I want to do, and then maybe afterwards, if I still was like, okay, now I've done that look, I can pass on the palette. So I would say the primary goal of my palette series was still mostly just to kind of try and get use out of everything in my collection, but it did kind of function as a decluttering tool as well, just to kind of help me get to know each palette a little bit better, give each palette its last chance to impress me when I used it, and then for things I was kind of iffy on, either fall back in love with it after using it or decide, okay, I'm good, I don't need it anymore. So in today's video, I want to kind of wrap up the palette series video, share with you guys the palettes that I ended up decluttering throughout the palette series, some of which I still have and some of which have already left, and then share the winners of the palette series, the looks and the palettes that I ended up liking the most after doing looks with them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Full details of this very, very green look should already be on Instagram. Full details of this very green look should be on Instagram. Today's do fave of the day is Audrey. Thank you so much for having your notification bell on and for always commenting on videos. I always notice you. Sit back, grab a snack, grab some caffeine, and let's get into it. And yes, I am wearing pajama shorts. What about it?
Somebody lied to her several times and told her that she was fly, hot, and sexy and beautiful, and she's nothing like that. She's nothing of the sort.
Can I hear a little commotion for the dress?
I guess I'll start off with the palettes I decided to declutter while doing the series. Again, I didn't originally set out for the palette series to be a thing where I would be decluttering things. I did have a rule with myself that I wasn't allowed to make the decision to declutter something until I'd given it its last shot and done a look with it. And I think that was really helpful as kind of like a final goodbye. But again, it was really helpful because some of these palettes I'd been holding onto with a specific look that I wanted to do in mind. And then after I did that look for the series, I was like, you know what? I'm good, I don't need it anymore. So the first palette that I decided to semi-get rid of is actually the first palette that I did a look with in the palette series, the Juvia's Place Mini Masquerade. I've been holding on to this for the longest time because I love the shades in here. However, I've always felt that with the exception of like the pink shades in here, the color scheme of this palette has always been very similar, like a kind of pared down smaller version of the Jaclyn Hill Morphe palette. I like the neutrals in my Jaclyn Hill palette, the original formula, a little bit more, just because I feel like Juvia's Place neutrals do tend to be on the warm tone side, but a little too warm tone, verging on like orange. But I like the colorful shades, particularly Juvia's Place's shimmer formula, a lot more in the Masquerade palette. And then I realized there's a lot of overlapping colors between the two palettes, and they're also the same pan size. So I Frankensteined it. I popped out the 3 shades from the Masquerade palette that I wanted to keep. So that was Chi, Makeda, and then my favorite copper shade, Casablanca. And then I popped out the kind of corresponding shades in the Jaclyn Hill palette. So that was this shade, and this shade, and I swapped them. So now I have 3 shades from the Juvia's Place Mini Masquerade in this palette that I wanted to keep, and then the 3 corresponding shades from the Jaclyn Hill palette are popped into here. Once I kind of consolidated what I wanted to keep, I decided to keep this one and then pass along the rest of the shades in the Juvia's Place Masquerade. Most of the palettes that I'm decluttering should be on my Poshmark with the exception of the ones that I got in PR. I don't sell those. So that includes my Frankenstein Juvia's Place Mini Masquerade featuring Jaclyn Hill. But yeah, depotting shades that I want to keep tends to not work for me. Depotting shades I want to keep and then putting it into an existing palette does work for me, and I do end up getting use out of those shades. Kind of weird. So even though the look that I did with this one for the palette series was one of my favorites in the series, I was kind of able to send her away on a burning boat. The next thing that made it onto the chopping block. Okay, Ted Allen. I knew this was coming. My ABH Travina palette I've gone through ups and downs with. There have been periods where I've been using this one and I'm like, wow, this slaps. I love it. I love every single look I get out of this one, but it's never been like the first palette that I reach for whenever I want to go for an ABH palette. I usually tend to reach for either soft glam or modern renaissance, especially if I'm wanting to do like a kind of berry toned look. There are other things I reach for over this one. Really, the only thing that was keeping this in my collection were the metallic shades in here, but I feel especially since I got the Jackie Aina palette, I haven't really been needing to reach for this. It's been collecting dust for a bit, so when I reached for it to do the look for the palette series, it was the first time I'd used the palette in couple months. We had our good times together, but I decided to pass this one along as well. The only shade that I wanted to keep in here was rose gold, so I actually ended up popping out that shade and replacing it with antique bronze from the Modern Renaissance. And honestly, I think it looks a lot better in that palette now. Like, here's Modern Renaissance with rose gold in it. I think that looks so nice. So Norvina is leaving. I did end up deciding to declutter one of my favorite colorful bigger palettes. This is the Moira Sweet Paradise. Highlighters in an eyeshadow palette kind of makes me never want to reach for said eyeshadow palette. Like, if it had just been like this rectangular palette color scheme, I think I would probably have reached for this a lot more. I do really like the mattes in here a lot, so the look I did for the palette series with this one was an all matte look if I remember correctly. But I don't love Moira's shimmers, so really I was only using like half the eyeshadow shades in here, and then I wasn't using the highlighters in here, so I was like, there's really no point in me keeping this. This was PR, so I'm giving this away to a friend. If you are someone who does like kind of all-in-one palettes like this, and you do like softer shimmers for colorful shades, you might like this a lot. I do still love the mattes in here, and I do like Moira's formula, but yeah, getting rid of this one just made sense. ColourPop Sweet Talk also got the axe. I found that I really wasn't reaching for it as often, mostly just because of the pressed glitters in there. I don't hate how peachy tones look on me, but I also don't feel like it's the most flattering color for my skin tone. Also, there are 2 pressed glitters in there that I rarely ever ended up using, and I was really only reaching in there for like 2 different matte shades and like 1 shimmer shade. So another Franken palette, and ColourPop's palettes are actually all magnetic, so they're really easy to kind of pop out the shades that you want to keep and switch around within different palettes. And I did not like the color scheme of the Candy Castle palette, but I liked the packaging a lot, and I really like how ColourPop's 10-pan palettes are a little bit more compact and sleek. There's not a ton of wasted space in their palettes, plus I like their mirror quality. I swear this is the last Frankenstein palette of the day, but I ended up keeping the shade that I wanted to keep from Sweet Talk, which was, I think, Side to Side. It's actually a Super Shock shade, and I think it's very similar to Frog, which is a Super Shock shadow, kind of like a pink version of Ritz. I would just buy Ritz personally. But yeah, keeping this and ended up decluttering Sweet Talk. I think that's still on my Poshmark, but I couldn't find it today, so yeah. Yeah. This shocked me too. I decided to let go of my Moonspell palette, and it felt kind of weird to be doing that, especially during Halloween. Oh my god, with this outfit? Maybe I need to keep it. Ugh. No. I'm like convincing myself in my head right now to keep it. Came to the realization that I was really only keeping it for this kind of like mossy olive green shade right here. I don't have any sage shades like this, but I really don't like how the purples in here perform, particularly Sabrina. This was a very disappointing shade. Really patchy, not a great formula, and purples tend to be harder to formulate anyways. But I guess I was surprised because the Luna Beauty Strawberry Dream palette, that's like one of my favorite colorful formulas. I like the neutrals in here okay, but I was really only keeping it for Mary and Marnie. And this was one of the palettes where I was like, once I did that look that I was planning to do with the green shades in here, I was like, you know what? I think I'm okay. Aesthetically, I love it, and I want to keep it just for this beautiful packaging. So I still like overall like this one, and I really like Luna Beauty's palettes, but quality wise I think the Strawberry Dream is far better. And then finally the Huda Beauty Desert Dusk was the last palette that I decided to declutter after doing a look with it. Like mid doing the eye look, I was like, yeah, I don't need this anymore. It was not because I didn't love the palette anymore, it just felt like something that I already had much of in my collection, and it just felt like the time. So that was pretty easy to pass along, and honestly I haven't missed it whatsoever. That's the thing, I hate sometimes that I'm very indecisive with decluttering things, where I'll like keep it and waffle over it for a couple weeks, but I think that's also good because I've never ever regretted getting rid of something. When I get rid of something, I know. Alright, moving on to the positive part of this video. My favorite looks of the series, the palettes that I used and I was like, wow, I forgot how good this was, or just things that really impressed me when I used them again. Number one, the Morphe James Charles palette, and I didn't just use it once during the duration of the series, but every time I use the colorful mattes in that palette, I'm reminded of why I loved it so much and why I hyped it up so much when I reviewed it. I don't always think that Morphe does the best quality, but I still think that that is probably the best palette that they've ever come out with. Particularly if you really like purple matte shades and blue matte. I think that palette has some of the best purple and blue mattes I've ever tried. So this look was probably my favorite of the palette series overall. Another one of my favorite looks from the series, or just a palette that really impressed me, was my little Kaji Chocolate Dahlia eyeshadow trio. The look that I did with this one, soft but glam at the same time. One might call it a soft glam. But I was just really impressed that with 3 eyeshadow shades, this cute little champagne shade here, this nice kind of like latte brown, and then this beautiful chocolate brown. I really liked the look that I was able to get out of just 3 shades. This is my little go-to for travel. It's very sturdy. These don't break easily. The tiny mirror in here is appreciated but useless. But yeah, she was a standout. Probably my second favorite look of the series behind the James Charles palette was the Subculture look. Miss ABH Subculture did not come to play. And I don't think I've ever really done a neutral look with Subculture before, or at least posted one. Obviously this had green, so maybe not 100% neutral, but it was a lot softer and a little bit less like hardcore grungy deep tones that the Subculture has. I still feel like I'll end up decluttering this palette eventually, but I love my Subculture. This is the original formula, which I know some people don't love, but for me, I think I got a good one. They're crazy pigmented, and while they require like a little extra TLC and a little extra patience, which I don't always have, I still love working with this one. But yeah, Miss Electric, she really did things. And then last but not least, my Oden's Eye Solmon palette look. This was another favorite, just because I would never think to pair green with purple, but somehow it worked and I really liked how it looked. I just love the lilac in this palette so much. I love the duochrome like lime green shade in here, and the mattes in this palette are beautiful. So if you're wanting just overall higher impact shimmers, I would recommend going with the Alva palette, and if you like kind of like mauvey pinky tone mattes, go with that one, but if you like brown tone neutrals and a really bangin' purple, this is the one to go for. Okay, so we went through the decluttered palettes, we went through the favorite looks of the series. I guess to kind of wrap it up, I would recommend doing your own palette series to literally anybody. Whether you have a gigantic collection where you want to get to know it more, or if you have like under 10 palettes and you still want to get use out of all of them. I had a lot of fun. I feel like it was a great way for me to get to know my collection a little bit more. And you don't necessarily have to view it as a decluttering tool the way I did, just simply as a way to appreciate your collection more and appreciate everything that you have. Personally for me, I only like to keep palettes in my collection that I really love and that I feel bring something to my collection and that I'll use and reach for often. And this was helpful for like helping me get to know my taste a little bit more, but also really just appreciate everything and fall back in love with certain things. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys, if you were following along on Instagram, enjoyed the palette series. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed down below. Follow me on Instagram if you want to see makeup looks, no longer in the palette series, but I'm honestly still gonna try and like reach for palettes more often instead of just using Modern Renaissance repeatedly. And if you made it to the very end of this video and the very end of the palette series with me, you get the bonus meme. Love you. Bye. At the gate outside, when they pull up, they give me loose.